Can we have order, please? Okay, we did say that in the previous classes we started looking at Module 2. And Module 2, as we know, begins with Renaissance as well as Reformation. Our interest in the previous lessons is to understand the concept of Renaissance as well as Reformation. Generally, Renaissance was all about adapting the method of science in preference to religion or faith in the way people are responding to their general social problems. Okay. Then on Reformation, we did say that its main concern was all about changing the way of worship, in which some clergy, Martin Luther and his team, did break away from the mainstream church, Catholic Church at the time, to form Protestantism. And then, of course, they did also contribute extensively to education. Among the things we saw was the introduction of what was called 3 levels of education. And the first level had paid attention to teaching using indigenous language, which of course was compulsory to all, both males and females. For the first time, we got that in terms of education provision. Okay, in today's class, our interest will shift to looking at Article 26 of the UN Charter, whose main, yes, madam? No? Is it? Yes, Universal Declaration. UDHR. Okay. Okay, that is the UN Charter on rights to education. It tries to highlight various concerns in terms of education provision. Okay, what we know, of course, is that at some point the issue of human rights was not talked about. Okay, they were not in existence until after some assessment of the amount of human suffering which had occurred after the First World War as well as the Second World War. Okay, probably world leaders decided for the first time to come up with some form of regulation, some form of protection, which will probably protect the dignity of humanity as opposed to the amount of suffering which humans faced during the Second World War. Okay. So, of course, the Charter, as we know it, they say various members of different states took part in that, and they contributed in its formulation, with the interest that all the member states will probably be able to implement the requirements of that particular charter. Okay. Now, ordinarily, the declaration has about 30 to 31 articles, and each particular article pays attention to a respective right. So our interest is only to look at Article 26. Okay, that is in terms of what it states and what its implication with regard to the education system in this particular country. How far have we gone in terms of its implementation as well as how far do we see its benefits in our education system, as well as paying to limiting factors which has enabled some people or some children failing to access or to enjoy this particular right, despite the country having introduced what is called free education policy. Okay, there are so many challenges which are hindrances to the implementation. Okay. Of course, if you have the notes with you, our objectives will be to describe the implication of universal education in relation to Article 26, Part 1, as well as Part 2, and then to justify the relevance of providing universal education. Then later on, we'll move on to identify factors that affect the education system. Okay, that is on the later stage. For now, let us pay attention to what the contents of the article is all about. Maybe before we can even go to the article, any understanding what we know human rights are all about? What are human rights? How many rights are we familiar with? Do people have rights? Which ones are you familiar with? Just in brief, yes, sir. Right to education. Okay. Right to right to marry. Okay. Yes, sir. Right to life. Okay. What other rights? Yes, sir. Right to access health services. Yes, sir. Okay. Okay. Survival rights and protection rights. Okay. All right. All these rights are quite relevant. They help us in terms of relating to each other. Okay. What we should also be able to know is that in as much as we have these human rights, we can lose them, and at the same time, we cannot freely express them without taking into consideration the interests of other people. Okay. We'll give an example. We all have a right to freedom of expression, isn't it? We can speak what we want. But if it is, okay, let's say this is a class, and then a person unnecessarily starts speaking, it means that it begins to infringe on what? Your right to education, isn't it? Because you want to learn, isn't it? So the rights, our rights ends where others' rights begins. It means that they help to define our relationship in a very smooth and conducive manner. Okay. That is the reason we're supposed to respect them at the individual level. Okay. Now, our interest, we said, was to look at Article 26. In case you have not seen the module begins with basic explanation about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Next, they are stating that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is a milestone document in the history of human rights drafted by representatives with different legal and cultural backgrounds from all regions of the world. Okay. The declaration was proclaimed by the United Nations General Assembly in Paris on 10 December 1948, and it has been translated into over 500 languages. In terms of definitions, human rights are defined as rights that every human being has by virtue of his or her dignity. Human rights are rights inherent to all human beings. Okay. Further, it says they define relationships between individuals and power structures, especially the state. Human rights delimit state power and at the same time require states to take positive measures ensuring an environment enables all people to enjoy their human rights. Okay, of course, those are critical elements. These rights are there to help us relate with one another in terms of at the individual level as well as at the national level, the state-citizen type of relationship. These rights are not every country, for example, has or is obliged to probably implement them. We understand there's so many countries where there is no any regard or no any even attempt to discuss the issue of human rights openly in public. Okay, it becomes a very serious offense against the state, isn't it? In this part of the world, because of the democratic principles that we have embraced, it is possible for us to openly talk about these rights. Okay. So we go to Article 26 of the UN Charter. It states, and I quote, that is part 1, everyone has the right to education, and education shall be free at least in the elementary and fundamental stages. Elementary education shall be compulsory. Okay, that is the first part. Everyone has the right to education, then education shall be free at least at elementary and fundamental stages, and elementary education shall be compulsory. What is our general understanding of that? When they say everyone has the right to education, what does that entail? Or what is its implication? Yes? Okay. Yes, sir?
I think, sir,
Okay. 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 Yes, sir, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, I don't think that. No, I think he's made a point.
Okay.
Yeah, it simply means that all citizens, regardless of their backgrounds, could access education. The choice is actually left with them.
Okay. That is correct.
Basic education.
The article is very clear. Provision of education to everyone without any form of segregation based on religious orientation, without discriminating people based on tribe, race, sex, political affiliation of the parents, and all nationality, and all those limiting factors. Now, this, we're not just learning about the article stating this, okay? it is about us going into the education system and probably being key decision makers in those lines. Okay. We'll be failing in our duties if we start looking at the skin color, is it height, the tribe, political affiliation or religious interests of an individual in order for us to provide quality education to them. Okay, so those are the limiting factors. Now, that is in the general sense. Now, the second question we need to answer is, fine, the article was, or the charter was declared, and in our country through a specific policy which was introduced, I think, is it 1996, 1994, through President Mwanawasa, the policy for free education, isn't it? How have we, first of all, we have the right to education on one hand, and then at the national level, there is this free education policy, which has been established and implemented. What are the positive elements can we be able to identify from these two pieces of legislation with regard to improving or contributing to education development in our country? Have we seen any progress, or we are just still at the same level? What do people say? Yes, sir. Okay. Okay, enrollments has increased in lower grades. And then that has also been translated, because if you increase capacity at lower grades, you expect that the numbers for people going to secondary will also increase, and that will also translate into the number of people going to tertiary education, isn't it? Statistics, of course, are very clear that from the time the policy was introduced, there's been increase in accessing education. Now, the policy it goes far much beyond just by declaring it, okay? Because once you have such a policy, there are other factors which might come to play for you to effectively implement it. Among those factors, of course, when you anticipate increase in enrollments, you probably require to highly invest in infrastructure development, isn't it? Of course, we did see over the years, number of primary schools were constructed. That was followed up by, some secondary schools as well? Okay. So the policy doesn't just end by formulating it. You need to have strategies for how this particular policy will probably be effectively implemented. Again, you don't just look at enrollments of learners, but the policy also shifts into the aspect of teacher training, because there is no way you can increase enrollments and then you do not have the capacity in terms of the teaching staff readily available to respond to those learners that you've recruited. So it is it has that multiple consideration which policymakers should be able to take into account when they are coming up with that. Of course, education is quite expensive, we know. Okay, and when you are coming up with such a policy, you need to be readily available to have stable source of resources which you are going to, which will supplement what the learners were paying, isn't it? So all those aspects are part of the considerations that we can be able to look at on that. Okay. Now saying education, probably the article says education shall be free at fundamental stages. They are not saying it shall be free at tertiary level. Okay. Reason why, despite having a right to education, people are required to pay for it, isn't it? Okay, because yeah, it becomes expensive as you go up. Okay, the article leaves out the part of tertiary education, unless in those countries who have adequate resources, other countries have made education compulsory and free from grade 1 up to tertiary level, isn't it? Of course, there's some schemes of support, even in our country, including at this institution. There's so many students who are accessing bursary schemes, isn't it? Which is, in one way or the other, it's an extension of ensuring that you have as many citizens as possible access not only primary and secondary, but also tertiary education. All right. We may look at the continuation of part 1. It says technical and professional education shall be generally available and higher education shall be equally accessible to all on the basis of merit. We have so many reactions on whether our tertiary education is based on the requirement of the article. Okay. See a lot of debates at times arising that some deserving students are not given an opportunity to be in higher learning institutions, but people are able to access tertiary as well as university education because of the connections which they have with those in the system. Okay, that is what this particular clause is trying to remove out. As we go into the education system, we have to be mindful of that. Okay, let us give chance to people on the basis of merit, because of course the system will be perceived to be compromised. I think that particular story of compromisation in higher learning institutions, it is not a new story. Although I think some efforts have been done because of advocacy by various concerned and responsible citizens who have brought the discussions to light. I think this time there's been some reduction, unless someone has a different observation on that particular element. We still see favoritism, people being given, is it being awarded the program of study, being awarded scholarships because they are linked to the system, or the system is as objective as we expect it to be? It is not. So basically, it is your duty. Okay, so when you go into the system, I know some of you are already there. Okay, those are some of the things that you should be familiar with. Don't say that we never heard about this. Okay, it was never part of the syllabus. People are supposed to be reminded based on the declaration. As serving teachers, we are responsible for ensuring that there's adherence to the requirements of international standards. Okay. Then part 2 says education shall be directed to the full development of the human personality, to the strengthening of respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. Okay, it shall promote understanding, tolerance, friendship among all nations, racial, religious groups, and shall further the activities of the United Nations for the maintenance of peace. That is the general concern of what education was intended to do. Once people acquire knowledge, they are supposed to be, what is the appropriate word? They're supposed to be civilized, and civilization comes with respecting each other. Okay, it comes with responsibility. It comes with being productive. Okay, being concerned for the welfare of other people in society. That was the general requirement of what our education system should be. Although we understand we're living in a global village, and some people have used the education system to be destructive to society and the world in general. Okay, people are highly learned scientists. Okay, they use the very education system which they were introduced to become productive. They use it to be destructive. Sometimes our education system can also lead to that. Okay, the next area of interest. Our next area of interest will probably be what are called social factors affecting the education system. I know we started already looking at the factors, but from the structure of the module, the article has been placed in isolation, but it is also one of the factors which affects the education provision. So now the part that we are moving to are the three ground motives that affects the education system. The three ground motives that we are talking about are philosophical, religious, as well as political factors. And then later we'll go to social cultural factors. Ordinarily, we have extensively looked at the Greek philosophy and its influence on our education system. Sometimes they may ask you, how does Western education or Western, is it philosophy or Greek philosophy, how has it influenced our education system? Before we respond to that particular question, we'll look at what the concept of ground motives are. Okay. The same ground motives are those forces which shapes or which determines the type of the education system a country is likely to have. Okay. They have summarized them in three categories. I know there are so many other factors, but the major influencers of what goes on in the education system are what we're calling ground motives. Okay. They include philosophical factors, then religion, as well as politics. Ground motives. Ground motives. We said there are key forces which influences the education system. I'll begin with something that you're familiar with because we're just from looking at Greek, education. We did look at Socrates, we did look at Plato, as well as Aristotle, and their contribution to education. From these scholars, we've learned the methodology of teaching, for example, question and answer method provided by Socrates, his distinction of knowledge in terms of ordinary knowledge and higher knowledge, and his emphasis that the education system should be able to emphasize on higher knowledge. We come to Plato, he did talk about the state-controlled education system. Okay. He did introduce idealism as an approach to education in which he emphasized abstract thinking to be encouraged in the learning environment. From Aristotle, we did look at his establishment of realism as a method of teaching in which verifiable or practical learning should be encouraged. Learners should be able to be given the materials to have real or hands-on experience in the learning process. He did talk about, if we look at what was going on at his learning institution, where emphasis was placed on students engaging in research, emphasis again was placed on students managing their own affairs or participating in managing their own affairs. In terms of the curriculum at his school, we saw the inclusion of sciences, languages, as well as physical exercises. All these are things that we have adopted in our education system. If they ask you in terms of how philosophy has influenced our education system, we're referring to these practical elements, okay? Because everything that we see in our education system reflects the type of education which was established by these early philosophers, okay? So that is in terms of how philosophy tends to shape the education system. Not every country has adopted the Greek education system. Okay. There are also what they call Eastern philosophers who also had their own education systems because we haven't tapped into their own values. They may not be relevant for us to start covering them. Okay. But other countries have adopted different philosophical ideologies and integrated in their own education system. We come to religion. Okay. I don't know if it's fortunately enough, this country was declared as a Christian nation, isn't it? It was declared as a Christian nation by the then President Frederick Chiluba. Okay. There has been so much debate in terms of what did he imply, okay, by declaring Zambia as a Christian nation. After him, we saw Michael Sata when he was being sworn in. He did declare that he was going to rule by the 10 Commandments, isn't it? We have highly committed Christians in this country. Okay. Okay. A nation has good values. Every nation has good values which it cherishes. Okay. And these values, they are usually guided by religious principles. They are influenced by religious principles. Our education system, from as early as the missionary time, has always been influenced by Christian values. Okay. Reason we see, even in the curriculum, the integration of religious studies. We go in terms of extracurricular activities, even in higher learning institutions, there are so many multiple, faith-oriented clubs for students and pupils to participate in. Okay. In the current government, we have also seen the establishment of what is called the Ministry of Religious Affairs, isn't it? And guidance, and national guidance. Okay. That particular ministry, of course, has the responsibility, that is what we've heard, it has the responsibility to provide national guidance in terms of values. Now, these values cannot just be talked about, is it from the community point of view? They are supposed to be part of the education system. Okay. We know other countries, they may not have anything to do with Christianity. Okay. It is quite clear there are secular states. There are also Islamic states, isn't it? There are also Hindu and Buddhist type of, is it self-defined countries. It means that they also embrace their own values based on the religion that they have embraced. And then we see that even being integrated in the education system. So religion is one of the powerful tools which shapes the education system in different countries, except only in countries which have openly declared that they will have nothing to do with religion. Okay. They see religion as something which brings confusion. Okay. They see religion as a source of confusion, and hence they have said, they have probably declared that they shall be called secular states, meaning religion cannot be able to influence decision making in terms of social, political, and economic situation. In this part of the country, because the declaration is part of the constitution, isn't it? It means that we have the responsibility to refer to Christian principles whenever we're making certain decisions. But of course, they have, various analysts have pointed out that, okay, fine, it is just in principle. It is just in principle. In practice, very much is done to ensure that everything is done in accordance with the requirements of Christian principles. Okay. All right, unless you have any comments on that before we proceed to the last one. Okay. Maybe people can comment at the end. Lastly, we go to philosophical factors being another major influence of the education system as a ground motive. It is very clear, it is self-evident that policies are determined by politicians. And when people are campaigning, you probably even hear, yes, sir, yes, madam. Okay, we've finished on philosophy, we've finished on religion, we're now on politics. Okay. All right. Politicians are the major determinants of policy direction, isn't it? Even when they're campaigning, of course, we happen to talk about this during the period when there's too much campaign messages being passed out to the electorates. Okay. when a political party is campaigning, they want to form government, they have the manifesto, isn't it? Even the ruling party, which is in power, they tend to have a manifesto, isn't it? The manifesto reflects the direction of policies which they are going to put either once they are re-elected or when a new government comes into power, isn't it? That is how policies are made. These policies are divided by sectors. Okay, for education, we are going to do this. For energy, we are going to do this. For agriculture, we are going to do this. Okay. But at the end of the day, these proposed manifestos may not entirely be implemented as they have been drafted. Okay, because we have what we call government machinery, the public civil servants. Okay, directorates of units who are specialists and conversant with how various units operate. And they're supposed to give guidance. The reason we see when when a party comes into power, you may find that they may not be able to do everything which they talked about, isn't it? Find that within 2 or 3 days they have changed the goalposts. Okay, they start doing the exact things they said we are not going to do. Okay, so that is how policy direction works. Policy making is not left only to politicians, but they are the major influencers. Of course, if it's a public policy which is to be formulated and implemented, various stakeholders will be taken on board. Okay, researchers, members of the business community, members of the community, and various civil society organizations. If that policy is supposed to be a progressive policy, okay, rather than something which is just imposed on the citizen. Okay, so that is in summary on how those key 3 ground motives operate. We've said the 3 key ground motives which affect the education system: philosophical, religious, as well as politics. They are all quite important in shaping or in determining the nature of the education system at large. Right, unless you have any questions arising from that. So I think do you have any question? Is it clear? Maybe I forgot on some elements on limiting factors to universal education. Okay, there's so many limiting factors to universal education which you can go to cite. Okay, among them, the very factors that we were raising, religion can be a limiting factor. Political conflicts can be a limiting factor. Distance in terms of where children are going to access the nearest education. High poverty levels can be an hindrance. Okay. Language, lack of infrastructure, lack of teaching and learning materials, unavailability of teachers. Okay. All these can be cited to be hindrances to the provision of universal education. Okay. Cultural practices, early marriages, as we know, this country in the past was known for that, isn't it? So many young people were denied education on the basis of that particular cause. Okay, so if you have a question, you just need to have an open mind to look at all the alternative possible hindrances or successes which have been scored with regards to our education system. So generally that is a picture of how the education system operates. In the next topic, we'll go directly to look at cultural factors, social cultural factors which affects the education system. Okay. Thank you so much. Unless there are questions. Yes, madam. Yes. Okay. Of course, politics, religion, philosophical ideology, they are all falling within the social aspect. Okay. You get it? They are all part, religion is social, politics is social. Okay. Philosophy is a social science. Okay. Are we on the same page? Okay. Now, we'll be looking at specifications when we come visit tomorrow. Pay attention to the legal aspect, we pay attention to the economic system, we pay attention to population, we pay attention to political conflicts, and the list will probably be high. Okay. Thank you so much.